Hello, everyone. I'm Manuel Gustavo Isaac. This is the Conceptual Engineering for Emerging Technology webinar series, featuring today a panel from AI ethics to governance with Alex Campolo, Katia Schwerzmann, Federica Russo, and Emma Ruttkamp-Bloem. So we'll start with a philosophical lecture by Federica Russo, who is Professor of Philosophy and Ethics of Technoscience at Utrecht University. Where she'll present a framework on how to merge or to coordinate epistemological and ethical consideration in the philosophy of AI. Then we'll move on with another philosophical talk by Alex Campolo and Katia Schwerzmann, addressing issues in the ethics of machine learning. And we'll wrap up the whole session with a discussion with Emma Ruttkamp-Bloem, who is Professor of Philosophy at the University of Pretoria and a member of the UN High-Level Advisory Body on AI. Federica is Professor of Philosophy and Ethics of Technoscience at the Freudenthal Institute at Utrecht University. She's also an honorary professor at University College London. Her work is in the philosophy of technology, philosophy of science, and philosophy of information. And today's presentation, building, as you can see, on a joint work with Eric Schließer and Jan Swagemans, will present an integrated framework in the philosophy of AI, ethics, cum epistemology. So please take it away, Federica.
Thank you very much for the very generous and kind introduction, Manuel. It's a real pleasure to present this joint work in this webinar series. I'm really honored that you're giving space to this line of work, and I'm very interested in what the other speakers today will have to add to the considerations that I have to make. Maybe just to give you a bit of background about this work. This started as from a seed money project that was funded by the University of Amsterdam a few years back. It was actually pre-COVID even. And it was a way of stimulating collaboration cross-faculty. Myself from a philosophy faculty of humanities, Eric Schließer working more in political philosophy, but from the Faculty of Social Science, and Jean Wagemans as an argumentation theorist. This seemed quite an interesting mix of expertise to get into AI, and especially the question of how to connect epistemology and ethics. And back then, it really seemed urgent to try and make an argument to see how to connect these two fields. And now it is quite interesting because as we speak, this is no breaking news anymore. And there is, for instance, a very active group from the University of Twente also working on how to connect ethics and epistemology. And I would like to mention especially the work of Dina Babushkina, who is actually making even a stronger argument that you need to work out the epistemology of AI before you can get to the ethics. And I want to say that because I see a lot of consonance with the arguments made by colleagues in philosophy of science and now kind of delving into AI. But so this is to give you a bit of background of where I come from. In terms of outline, I know I have only 20 minutes to present this work, so I will try to kind of rush through the main ideas of this paper. And the first idea is how to make this step from what we called in the beginning ethics out epistemology to ethics cum epistemology. It seemed to us that we are dealing with projects that are largely disconnected, but one way in which we could reconnect these two fields, ethics and epistemology, is by shifting focus from the output to the process. And this is where I think my expertise in philosophy of science and especially methodology of science really kicks in, because this idea of a process, really looking at the methods broadly construed, is something that I've seen kind of missing in the philosophy of AI so far. And this leads to think of ethics as a continuous assessment from design to use rather than as a post-hoc assessment. And then I would like to introduce briefly the second big kind of contribution of this paper, which is how we can include insights from argumentation theories when we try and assess the ethics of ethics system. And to make things simple, I will present 4 simplified scenarios where you can see how the argument works. So let me get started with how we go from this separation to the conjunction of ethics and epistemology. So the first observation is that there are disconnected projects. Questions about ethics really are related to how to make an AI ethically compliant, how to ensure that algorithms are fair as possible and as biased as possible. And this is clearly very important. The ethical questions that AI poses nowadays is really critical, but in some way it remains really disconnected from the epistemology of these systems. And so here we see how questions of transparency or opacity of AI kicks in, or whether we should have AI as a glass or opaque box. But what seemed to us in this joint work is that we really need to connect these 2 projects. And our approach was not that we wanted to discuss whether there is an intrinsic value in explainable AI. That was not the point. The point was really to show how questions of epistemology bear on ethics and vice versa. And because these 2 projects are largely disconnected, sometimes it is really difficult to see how they are connected. Also, we are well aware that other people have been discussing how to kind of inject values into design, and I have here in mind especially the very prominent approach of value-sensitive design. But it seemed to us that what we are trying to say in this approach is actually broader than that, because we want to look at the whole process from design to use, and also considering multiple types of actors. And so in a sense, we are using ethics as a shorthand for axiology. And so values also include social aims, for instance. And so it is really kind of a broader look at AI from a methodological perspective, and then see how values come in, and then what can be done. What really preoccupied us is a current trend to look at ethics as a postdoc assessment. And this is clearly very important, but also very limited in scope. So everyone agrees that AI raises important ethical concerns, and this is why we need to work towards having auditing mechanisms, and also how to verify responsibility and accountability. But if this happens only postdoc, then we are worried that we kind of arrive too late, or the ethical perspective arrives too late with respect to the needs that we have. And also, what you can see is that a number of excellent protocols do exist, and they are valuable, but then sometimes they are perceived as being kind of window dressing, whereas what we are interested in is really to contribute to the scaffolding of this AI system. In my view, it is unjustified to be so critical of the ethics of AI as being window dressing. But then there is an important question to be asked about potential collaborations and how to make this more kind of integrating into the design. Now, you can see this as a critique to the ethics of AI, but actually epistemology also suffers from similar problems. This is what we call the standalone epistemology. And there is this vast and rich and fast growing debate on the epistemology of AI that focuses on questions about reliability and trustworthiness, but invariably this literature focus on how we trust we come to trust an outcome of an AI. And so a lot of hinges on how to define key notions such as transparency, opacity, accuracy, and so on and so forth. And while there is a wide agreement that most AI systems are opaque, then they turn this question into how can we trust the outcomes of opaque AI. But, you know, this all of a sudden becomes pretty orthogonal to the ethics concern. And this is why we tried to make a different move. And the move that we tried to make was shifting the focus from the outcome to the process. Now, I will try to compact a kind of a pretty long argument into something much shorter with the following picture. I am using here the concept of holistic model validation that I borrow from philosophy of science literature looking at methods across the sciences. And so basically, what you can look at AI system as not different from models and methods developed, say, in econometrics or in social science or even in physics, etc. And so if you look at the design, so at the whole process from design to use, then we all start from a research hypothesis or something we want to do. We then look at background knowledge and theory that is available. We then go through a process of model building and data analysis, interpretation of results, user results. Now, this kind of iterative process clearly uses more of the terminology that is used in basic science and less, say, in applied science, AI, or technological development. But you can kind of quickly adapt it and see that the process is not that different after all. And then you can ask, where do values come in? And actually, the values come in at each and every step. There are values that kick in when you formulate a research hypothesis or when you say, I would like to develop an AI system for that purpose. There are values that come in the way you reconstruct background, what is available and available theories. And so basically values are basically there at each and every step. And this is an iteration because also the development of an AI system or outputs of a model, then kind of feedback, research hypothesis, or further technological development later on. So you see that this is really a never-ending process of thinking, where are the values, how do they enter, how they are integrated in the methodological development or in the analysis of data or in the interpretation of results, etc. So this is where I really see a potential also for integrating a lot of very good existing work in philosophy and methodology of science that can be useful to the development of emerging technologies, and AI here is actually an excellent case in point. This leads to seeing ethics not as a post-hoc evaluation, but as a continuous form of assessment. We want to see ethical considerations to be raised already at the design stage, throughout the whole process, and in combination with epistemological and technical considerations. This is the idea of the epistemology cum ethics, and we really see this as the way forward to an explainable AI. So the reason why we really push for this line is that we care about the role of designers, programmers, engineers, and other actors too. Now, if you buy into this line of reasoning about how epistemology and ethics are connected, clearly there are important questions about governance that we are already asking. But if you ask me, then I think the next important item on the agenda is really the training of those who are charged with the development of these AI systems, because we have to ensure that this is really an integrated integrated kind of approach, and is not kind of coming as a watch, as a dog watch approach, that ethics is there just to keep the margins, but it's really part and parcel of the design process. Now, this idea of holistic model validation and of a glass box epistemology, which is how to inspect at each and every moment what happens at the epistemological level and at the ethical level, is related to the idea of the possibility of inspecting a system at any time. It may sound pretty idealistic, but there is here actually an element of normativity that is important, because we know that part of the problem comes from the fact that systems are opaque, but then you can start saying, no, we want to have a much more detailed, way of reporting on coding and reporting on design, so that we can inspect how programmers, engineers, designers have made specific choices. Okay, now if you think about it, medicine has undergone similar moves in the regulations, for instance, of randomized controlled trials. So this can be possible somehow. It's not it is not impossible in principle. It is certainly difficult, and it requires a lot of willingness to change the way we currently do AI, but not impossible per se. Okay, so far I try to give you an idea of what it takes kind of to connect ethics and epistemology if you look at AI from the perspective of methodology. But you can also look at explainable AI from the perspective of argumentation theory. And I'm going to explain this to you because I am aware that this is not an obvious idea to include. So here we are really dealing with two dimensions of inquiring, one that is normative and one that is more epistemological. These are kind of the two dimensions that I already described, and I said we have to try and connect them. But then there is another dimension of inquiry, and this has to do with expertise. So who has the expertise to report back on how an AI system has been designed from an epistemological and or ethical perspective. And this is where the idea of learning from argumentation theory comes in. An argument from expert opinion, and an argument that says P is true because P is said by some expert E. Okay, and in argumentation theory, often this is considered a fallacious argument because expertise is something that people think you cannot assess. But here we are trying to reverse actually the perspective. So, no, actually you can assess a lot about the expertise. So this is where you ask a number of possible critical questions. For instance, you can ask whether the expert is really an expert about what you are asking about. And so here you can check which form of institutionalization guarantees trusting the source of expertise. Or you can actually check whether the expert really said something like P. And so you can check the contents there, or you can check whether there is expert agreement or disagreement about this issue P. And finally, you can check whether there are any other interests at play. And so you can check whether there are other forms of institutional guarantees. Now, this may seem still too abstract, but then you have to start thinking, when you inquiry about whether an AI system is fair or unbiased, the point is who is being asked the question, so who answers, and who is asking the question and for what purpose. And here I'm massively simplifying the situation because, of course, expertise is also comes into degrees. Then we also consult with an AI system itself to check whether there is a compliance or what kind of outcomes have we put in place. But here is kind of to give you four broad and simplified scenarios. Let me see if you can see my pointers here. This is the first scenario in which you have epistemic symmetry between experts. So, for instance, I am a designer and another designer asked me about what guarantees that an AI is actually compliant with certain ethical requirements. So here I can give technical details because I can say my algorithm is designed such and such, and this is what ensures that is not biased and fair. So here you are really at the same level and you can ask for technical details. Now, in the second scenario, you can see that there can be epistemic symmetry also of known experts. Here, basically, what you do is if you ask about both epistemology and ethics, then you defer the answers appealing to axiology and institutionalizations. So what happens is that if both actors are known experts, then trust comes from the process and from the institutional standards that allow this. So if I go to the bank and I ask why my loan was denied, the bank officer is also not an expert. And so this person will probably say, well, because our bank complies, you see. So then you see that you can't give the technical details. In this scenario, you have epistemic asymmetry between expert and non-expert. If I, as a kind of a person from the general public, ask directly an AI developer, clearly I won't understand a word if the person gives me technical details of AI. And so the problem really is how to ensure this. And this is where, again, you flip to trusting the process rather than understanding the details. And finally, the epistemic asymmetry of expert and non-expert is again a scenario in which we defer to axiology and institutionalization. This could be the case where the bank officer, who is a non-expert, asks for kind of reassurance to the expert, which is kind of the designer, etc. And so we lay down these overly simplified scenarios to show that you will have to ask who is asking the question and what kind of expertise is needed to answer ethics questions. And so just to require that you kind of show or display and so make an AI a glass box will not ensure that ethics is by the same token kind of ensured, precisely because not everyone will be able to understand how ethics is ensured from the epistemology and so the technicalities of the AI. I'm ready to conclude. I'm sorry, I'm already over time. It is really high time that epistemological and normative questions are considered together rather than separately. One way in which we can connect them is really looking at the whole process. So we shift the focus from the outcome to the process, and it is by looking at the whole process that we can see how normative and epistemic questions have to be considered, and this entails that ethics becomes a continuous assessment rather than postdoc. Now, if we still want to make a step further, we have to look at who is asking questions, from what point of view, and what kind of expertise they have. And then you can kind of calibrate how much expertise and therefore what kind of information will reassure about the ethical compliance depending on who are the actors. And this is where we try to plot the epistemic symmetries and asymmetries in terms of expertise in the ethical and epistemological aspects of AI. And this concludes my presentations, and I really thank you for your attention.
So the next talk will be, as I've said before when introducing the session, will be by Alex Campolo and Katia Schwerzmann. Alex is a postdoc researcher in the Department of Geography at Durham University, while Katia is a research associate in the Interact project at Bochum University. They've conducted recently joint work in the ethics of AI and machine learning. They've also a paper that's come up last year in big data and society that also kind of post in the chat if that's fine with you guys. And today's presentation will build, I believe, on that framework that they are kind of building together, dealing with alignment and the emergence of a machine learning ethics. So please, well, take it away. The screen is yours.
So yeah, I'm Alex Campolo. And yeah, I think we're just going to jump right in. Thanks so much for having us. And yeah, we'll get started. So over the past decade, a new word has frequently appeared in conversations about the ethics of artificial intelligence. And that word, obviously, is alignment. One notable early appearance of this word was in a document called the Asilomar AI Principles, issued by an influential NGO called the Future of Life Institute. And they affirm, quote, highly autonomous AI systems should be designed so that their goals and behaviors can be assured to align with human values throughout their operation. With the even more recent advent of highly capable language models, alignment seems to constitute now an important, even a hegemonic framework for thinking about the ethics and politics of artificial intelligence. So you can see, quite recently, even more, OpenAI announced that they would be devoting 20% of their considerable computing resources to something that they call super alignment, which is this question of how we ensure AI systems much smarter than humans follow human intent. So in our kind of overview of the existing field of alignment, what we've seen is that much of the field involves choosing some set of values to which models should be aligned, or perhaps a process for choosing these values, or ways to implement them technically. Our perspective is different. We want to step back and think about the ethical framework of alignment itself, asking these types of second-order questions. So what does the widespread acceptance of this ethics tell us about our societies, our technology, our culture? What is the specificity of alignment? How does it propose to regulate and govern our conducts in specific ways? What types of normative claims can be made in the name of alignment? And why should we accept these claims? And then finally, a sort of broader question, which is how can alignment link up to other kinds of social, political, or ethical projects?
So in the spirit of the conceptual engineering framework of today's discussion, we hope to contribute to a description / clarification of not only how the concept of alignment is used by the machine learning community, but also of the specific logics implied in the idea of aligning machines and humans. The term alignment has an inherited set of meanings and ethical connotations that predates its use in the context of machine learning. Following the Oxford English Dictionary's definition, alignment refers to both the action and result of arranging in or along a line or into appropriate relative positions. So the word appropriate already indicates some normative dimension. We notice that there are two possible actualizations of alignment here, a relative and an absolute one. Logically, there is a first symmetrical or relative sense of alignment. This happens when elements take their appropriate position relative to each other. This logic is captured by an old militaristic sense of alignment as falling into line or formation, whereby soldiers arrange themselves in relation to both the abstract representation of an order and the others around them. And we argue that this sense of alignment corresponds to the engineering practice of aligning a model through fine-tuning. In this process of mutual rapprochement, humans align with machines in the sense that they formulate values that are encodable in machines, and machines align with humans in that they learn these values through training processes. This logic contrasts with an asymmetric absolute sense of alignment, where the individual elements are subordinated to a fixed, determinate, hegemonic position to which they align, rather than to each other. We might think here of the geopolitical category of aligned versus non-aligned countries that emerged during the Cold War, where post-colonial countries refused to submit to the polarized binary between Eastern and Western, communist and capitalist blocs. We sense that this second asymmetric logic of alignment is what philosophers and ethicists generally desire when thinking of the super alignments of AI models, particularly in the existential risk discourse. In both logics, the relative and the absolute one, we notice that alignment is never only about values, and always also about power, its symmetry and asymmetry. Thus, alignment must be considered not only as an ethical, but also as a political question. We ask if the framework of alignment hasn't so far led to formulate issues of power through an exclusively ethical vocabulary that seeks to technically solve a problem that is always more than technico-ethical. A problem that pertains to who is in the position to decide over values and impose them. So one of our fundamental hypotheses is that alignment ethics in both these logics seeks to bridge the gap or domesticate the tension between two types of normativity that we call, somewhat paradoxically, an is normativity and an ought normativity. The is normativity designates the statistical regularities present in the data set. These norms are not natural or given. They express statistical structures that are normative in that they reflect problematic values deeply embedded in society. These values become perceptible, for instance, in the toxic, racist, or sexist outputs of chatbots. By contrast, the ought normativity corresponds to the values that are desirable to society. And the programmers seek to introduce these values from the outside, generally during fine-tuning, in order to deal with the undesirable and unanticipated machine behaviors that first appear post hoc, as we've seen, when users start interacting with the model. The is normativity needs to be modified, regulated, corrected through external oughts that nonetheless cannot be encoded directly as rules because of machine learning specific example-based programming paradigm. And here we just want to refer to this discussion that we have in our previous paper about the rule-based programming paradigm and example-based one. Instead, these values must be elicited through human written examples, the training of a reward function and the optimization of the pre-trained model. The framework of alignment serves to manage the relation between these two kinds of normativity and deal with the fundamental tension between them. It works to manage, control, and regulate a conflict of value that has so far been dealt within the political sphere. Now this conflict is conceptualized through and managed within the domain of machine learning engineering and its specific set of technological constraints.
Right. So we can try to make some of these more theoretical points a bit more concrete by turning to some of the actual technical practices involved in alignment. So with the more recent predominance of large language models, we've seen a lot of examples of these ambiguities and tensions. So you might take the well-known example of hallucination, right? Drawing on this psychological metaphor, it refers colloquially to the tendency of language models to make things up, or perhaps a bit more precisely, to generate outputs that sound fluent despite being somehow unfaithful either to input text or to the external world. Now, these types of behaviors are obviously problematic if AI is to be trusted in high-stakes contexts in public life, but we want to understand more specifically why they have been conceptualized in terms of alignment, in terms of what we see as ethical gaps between desired or expected and actual or undesired or unintended model behaviors. So from a technical perspective, these gaps seem to arise due to the fact that these models are pre-trained on a very simple yet powerful objective. Given some sequence of input words, predict the next word or set of tokens in that sequence, right? This is a very well-known training objective. Especially with very large language models, this objective has proven to be very effective on many different types of linguistic tasks downstream. So conversations, question answering, summarization, anything that you might use ChatGPT for. So in this sense, hallucination is one instance of a more general problem with pre-training, which is that as people experiment with and just use generative models, they gradually seem to recognize patterns of behavior that, although the model is fulfilling its likelihood-based objective perfectly well, it somehow subverts our implicit, contextual normative expectations about these downstream tasks. That is, tasks that have been learned via transfer from this pre-training objective. So to align a model in this technical sense means, in our view, to somehow resolve these emergent gaps between a likelihood-based pre-training task and these more diffuse, implicit normative expectations. And a related empirical observation, and I hope that this is maybe a point of similarity with the first talk, is that because these expectations about the tasks are not explicit, they may not even be fully formed, we tend, and perhaps we can only make these ethical judgments only retrospectively. In other words, there's no kind of pre-existing rule or norm that we can point to that they violate. Rather, we develop intuitions about where and how norms may have been violated. And similarly, due to the black box nature of the model, we may even have to rely on kind of technical guesswork about why these divergences occur. So our interpretation is that alignment gives us this feeling of, or an ethics about, unintended consequences. However, as Katia will now discuss, there are ongoing attempts to address these ethical challenges technically.
So the subsequent objective of the fine-tuning process, the second part in the diagram that you see, is to introduce external values into the model by retraining it on examples specifically written by humans for this purpose. Because machine learning is example-based, the alignments of the model through fine-tuning cannot be attained in a deterministic way through the formal specification of rules that would correspond to ethical imperatives, and that would result in steps that ensure that the given output will result in a determinate proper output. This excludes a deontological type of ethics. Instead, what programmers can do is to create or choose the outputs that they believe best conform to the values or behaviors they desire, and then use these outputs containing the ought normativity as training inputs to guide the behavior of the model. The steps to fine-tuning the model are complex, and while we cannot go over them in detail here, let's just retain that what these steps accomplish is to internalize and automate human value judgment by training a function that rewards the right machine behavior in the future absence of human judgment. So the reward model is number 2. That is what is trained based on these new tailored examples. And while the vocabulary of optimization and reward maximization could remind of a consequentialist type of ethics, where means are chosen to maximize an end, in fact, both ends and means are shifting in their relative position through recursive processes during fine-tuning. The chosen values upon which most AI companies like Anthropic's and OpenAI agree are honesty or truthfulness, helpfulness, and harmlessness. These values are not external to AI, nor are they absolutes, set once and for all. Instead, they are developed relative to the training process, its optimizing logic, and its result, which are constantly shifting. Our hypothesis is that this form of ethics is specific to machine learning and differs from deontology, consequentialism, and even from a bioethical type of ethics. But we would be interested in discussing this further.
Right. And then to make matters even more complicated, you know, in doing our survey of this field, we had to acknowledge that there's another sense of alignment that's being developed, we think, at least initially, in parallel to these technical ones, specifically in philosophical communities that have coalesced around what they term superintelligence. So a first thing that we noticed is that in itself, this use of the term alignment was relatively non-technical, although of course it can link to these technical discourses in different ways. So instead of emerging from what we were talking about previously, from these specificities of machine learning training paradigms, the notion of superintelligence appeared to us to be almost minimalistic, right? In the words of influential philosopher Nick Bostrom, superintelligence can be, quote, any interest or any intellect that greatly exceeds the cognitive performance of humans in virtually all domains of interest. In this light, the key problem for this sense of alignment is that of control. So how can humans in the present somehow regulate the behaviors of a intelligence that will greatly outstrip our own? Because these superintelligent systems will pursue the kind of optimization objectives that we've discussed previously in ways that are very difficult for comparatively limited humans to imagine, this community warns that they are therefore likely to lead to existential risks, the end of the human species. And we can't really get into the argumentation, but they give reasons for this kind of conclusion. These risks, we also note, tend to be illustrated, again, not through the empirical identification of undesired behaviors, as we've seen in the kind of technical alignment literature, but rather through these speculative exercises, even sort of parables. You know, we notice the kind of more counterintuitive they are, the more valued they are by the community. So a well-known example from a philosopher named Eliezer Yudkowsky, who's a kind of, we think, like a self-trained virtuoso of this type of genre, begins with a super intelligent AI system that appears to have a beneficent training objective, which is to maximize for human smiles. According to this well-known scenario, at some point, a super intelligent AI finds that the best way to maximize for this objective is to inject human with drugs. Later, as it becomes more powerful, it finds ways to kind of genetically engineer human brains to produce smiles, all while hiding these behaviors from the programmers. So alignment in this sense has come to name a strategy for dealing with these pernicious problems. To the best of our knowledge, the use of the word in this sense can be dated to around 2014 in a white paper written by the influential AI researcher Stuart Russell, which is titled, quote, Value Alignment in Autonomous Systems, which affirms, quote, for an autonomous system to be helpful to humans and to pose no unwarranted risks, it needs to align its values with those of the humans in its environment in such a way that its actions contribute to the maximization of those values for humans. And also from a genealogical perspective, we're interested in this specific phrase value alignment, which to us seems kind of like a new idea in ethics. And currently our view is that its most likely source is actually from a management or organization literature that dates to the 1990s. So there was a management theorist named Peter Senge, whose influential book, The Fifth Discipline, has a definition of alignment, which you can see in the figure here, which refers to a process by which individuals adopt a shared organizational vision in order to function as a team or a whole. And this process also encompasses the harmonization of possible conflicts of individual values, for instance, between work and home. So just to conclude here, the shift to this context of superintelligence raises the stakes considerably through probabilistic arguments. If all existing and future human lives and happiness hang in the balance, even if the absolute probability of any existential risk is small, the kind of expected penalty or disutility obliterates any other consideration. So no longer merely a virtue of successful corporate organizations, value alignment as a solution to control problems associated with superintelligence becomes this kind of all-encompassing ethical imperative. Bostrom, for example, concludes that philosophers could, quote, postpone work on some of the eternal questions for a little while, delegating that task to hopefully more competent successors, i.e. these superintelligent systems, in order to focus our own attention on a more pressing challenge, increasing the chance that we will have competent successors. So you can see here a sort of discourse in which all philosophy needs to be kind of subordinated to alignment. The existential, even eschatological horizon forms this kind of 0 point for alignment discourses.
We come now to our conclusion. We have shown that alignment as both a technological method and an ethical framework is a way of pacifying and technologically regulating the conflict between the de facto societal norms and biases reflected by the data sets that appear once users start to interact with the model, the is normativity, and the norms following which models and users should behave, the ought normativity. Machine learning mediates ambiguously between technical standards, values captures in the data sets, and values introduced during fine-tuning, producing an apparent continuity between these epistemologically very diverse levels, and contribute to the appearance of an evident consensus. So instead of handling this gap through political settlements that are open to revision, the super alignment framework is characterized by the desire to inscribe norms and values in the machine once and for all, through the automatization and optimization of human judgment, in such a way that both machine and users would become aligned with values and consistently yield desired behaviors. The political as the stage on which parties struggle to find a consensus among an irreducible plurality of values, goals, and desires to shape life and action in common, is replaced by an ethico-technological framework whose aim and claim is a quote-unquote solved world. It's an expression by Nick Bostrom. This is a totalizing and problematically universalist claim that leads to dangerous simplifications as AI technology comes to be understood as a quick fix to all humankind's ailments. It leads to a disregard for power and resources asymmetries and inequalities, and to discounting democratic decision-making processes. In contrast, we consider value conflicts as inevitable and even desirable in the sense that they alert us to what matters to a society. Thank you very much.
We'll smoothly turn to the last segment of that panel, which is a discussion with Emma. So before diving into some of the question I would like to put forward to you, Emma, let me just kindly introduce you in turn. So Emma Ruttkamp-Bloem is Professor of Philosophy in the Department of Philosophy at the University of Pretoria. She's the AI ethics lead in the Center for AI Research in South Africa. Her work is in the philosophy of science and the ethics of artificial intelligence. And she's also very much active as an AI ethics policy researcher. In this capacity, she's a member of the UN AI Advisory Board. She was the chair of the UNESCO ad hoc expert group on the ethics of artificial intelligence, and she's a member of the UNESCO World Commission on the ethics of scientific knowledge and technology. So in our discussion, we'll try to address the question on how to basically integrate the philosophical insights that we've witnessed in the first segment of this session into actionable policy recommendation for responsible AI. So maybe that's a big chunk, but still we'll try to address this kind of challenges. So, well, thank you so much, Emma, for joining us for that discussion. So let's start with, well, me putting you the first question to you. In October, well, last year, as I've mentioned, you were formally appointed to the UN Secretary General AI Advisory Body. The body released its interim report in December. It's still open to feedback until the end, well, very soon, the end of this month. And so can you just please update us on the next stages of the roadmap until the summit of the future next fall, and maybe just kind of start by reminding us of general mission of the body itself.
Thank you, Manuel. Thank you very much for inviting me. I've been following these events closely. I always watch the YouTube video. I never have time to watch the actual event. I hope I can do this justice. I think these two papers were fantastic. I don't know how, we'll see. I hope that I get inspiration. It's a really tall order, but let's try. But thank you so much. And I'm very happy to meet all three of you. And Federica, I've been reading, I know you from philosophy of science context. So specifically, it's very nice to meet you because I've read you often before. So the UN body. So the immediate tasks was to, or still are, to try and build a global scientific consensus on the risks and challenges of AI, but also on the opportunities and the enablers, and how to harness those for the Sustainable Development Goals, because the world, or at least in the UN world, there is a lot of discomfort and concern about that we will not meet the 2030 deadline to meeting the Sustainable Development Goals. And then, of course, the focus is on how to strengthen international cooperation on AI governance. So the body will look at various models of governance and debate what new functions might make sense, and try to build, obviously, on existing governance frameworks and instruments. So from the date that we were kind of convened on 27 October, we were broken into 5 different working groups, one group on opportunities and enablers, one on risks and challenges, and then the third one broadly on governance, but breaking into 3 subgroups, one on international interoperability of AI governance, one on alignment of AI governance with international norms and values, and then one on options for international AI governance institutions. And we had about 40 meetings between 27 October and 30 November, and all of them online in different time zones, which was not so easy, but we made the date to have the first interim report after our first in-person meeting in New York in the beginning of December. And since then, we've been engaging on the interim report through different kinds of surveys. And the main survey where you can submit your comments to the Secretariat is still open. We had our second in-person meeting last week in Geneva. And for that meeting, we focused on the form of international governance. The interim report spoke about the principles and the functions, specifically the functions that we would want international governance to perform, why it is needed, and then what it is that we want it to be. But last week we focused a lot more on the form of the model, and I'm not at liberty to say anything about that. There will be a report that will be shared with member states in the next few weeks. And now what we focus on is engagement and deep dives. So we have network consultations, regional with regional organizations and governments, platforms such as the G7, G20, the WEF, different summits, obviously the AI for Good Summit. I really hope that I'm still here. Okay, I am. Sorry, South Africa electricity. Not going to say more than that. Then, there's the AI for Good Summit at the end of May. There's the summit in Singapore at the same time. Different conferences like NeurIPS, the ACM FACT conferences, and obviously then civil society organizations around youth, gender, environment, and so on. But then, so we have specific deep dives, and you can also look at information on that on the UN website, focusing on youth and tech, AI and gender, peace and security, sub-Saharan Africa, children, intellectual property, and finance. And that will then build up to the third in-person meeting in Singapore, at which time we have to start outlining the final report, which we will round off during June to August. And then we will present the final report at the Summit of the Future, where the Digital Compact will be negotiated with member states.
Thank you so much for this very clear summary of the amazing work you did since last fall. That's very impressive. So, turning to the next one. So we saw in the previous segment of this panel, actually with Katia and Alex talking about aligning AI systems with human values. And a critical step in this alignment process is the specification and operationalization of the said value into context-sensitive norms and design requirements for AI systems, as they call that process in the SDIT program, especially drawing on Ivo van der Poel's framework, Design for Value framework. That's typically at stake in the context of the fine-tuning phase of an AI model, as you remind us of, Alex, I believe. So these two operations, namely specifying and operationalizing values, are also critically at stake in the implementation of regulatory and legal frameworks that are built on so-called high-level value-based principles, such as the OECD's G20 framework, the UNESCO recommendation, the AI Act as well to some extent. And so maybe that process is more kind of exemplarily at stake in the standardization of these values into legally binding requirement. And so you've been involved in UNESCO's recommendation on the ethics of AI and subsequent implementation guiding instruments, such as the ethical impact assessment toolkit. And could you please tell us what, in your view, makes this kind of human values so difficult to specify, to operationalize, to standardize? What's so hard about this process? And so maybe you can also gesture towards some specific strategies that you've been kind of drawing from, especially maybe in the context of the UNESCO's EII toolkit.
Oh, thank you, Manuel. So I think this is going to be a long-winded answer, because I think I have to start a little bit with thinking about why it is difficult to think about the alignment problem itself, and then to think about why it is difficult also to align the value-based principles. So what is it? And then maybe take it, because we're talking about governance in my context, also to the pros and cons of international alignment. I mean, not everybody, it isn't necessarily the case, and I'm speaking in my own capacity, I'm not representing the UN body. It's not necessarily the case that it is intuitively preferred to have international governance of AI, if that means a unified approach. So on the one hand, we want to align. On the other hand, we might not want to align when it comes to policies, not when it comes to values, but there's the value alignment between the human and the machine, and there's value alignment among humans, and then there's value alignment among countries. And so I'll try to say something about all three of those levels. And you just have to shout at me if I take too long. So obviously, in terms of why values are so hard to align, I mean, we know that maybe just one more motivation of why I want to start here and not immediately talk about the alignment of value-based principles. I think it also has to do with the fact that, apart from the fact that I think the problem with the principles have their roots in the value alignment problem, there is also the issue that the tech community feels alienated from value statements that come from the social sciences or the humanities, and even from the legal sciences, and also in terms of the issues that Mittelstadt and Hagendorf point out about not, they just say they don't feel, they're not trained to worry about the moral consequences of their designs in any way. I don't mean they feel alienated inherently from value statements, just in terms of the fact of their training. But so why is it that values are so hard to align? If we're talking about human-machine alignment of values, there's obviously the ambiguity of human values, but I think that is simply something that we have to deal with, and maybe it is sometimes used as an excuse not to really engage with the problem. There is the difference that Dan Brigger points out to the tension between do what I mean versus literally do what the algorithm is told to do. So that we want the algorithm in these cases often to kind of interpret our emotional reasons for our goals, which of course is not captured in the way in which it is trained. There's the issues of value drift, inconsistency with human community over time. Even if there is alignment, communities change, values change. Then there is the big question that all of you have pointed to, and that is whose values? Because, we have to wonder, we have to concern ourselves with this, and what level of values, what kind of values is it that we're trying to imbue the algorithms with? Then, there's a problem of inverse value alignment, of course. We have to think very hard about the nature of the values that we want to align if we get to artificial general intelligence, and we will have the flip side. So hopefully, that kind of intelligence would have been trained on values that actually make sense if they are flipped back to humans. But then I think the most important thing is that we have not really, obviously there's definitions. What do we mean by agent? What do we mean by goal? What do we mean by value, by morality? But then there are alternatives to this problem also. And maybe we don't often stand still to reflect on these alternatives enough. So we could also just say, well, we are not designing intelligent agents. We are designing software tools that do what we tell them to do, and that are constrained in particular ways, constrained in terms of making moral decisions, and constrained in terms of agency and self-improvement. And that's one school of thought. And then there's Russell's school of thought that says, no, we have to build in uncertainty so that the algorithm checks with humans. But then there's the underlying problem, and that comes out so often in aligning policies and principles, and that will take me then to that point, and that is that, stop and consult humans. Are humans, what is it that, how is it that we commune with our values? I mean, if we really want to be honest, are humans necessarily better moral decision makers than machines? I think the reason why we may want humans to be, to still take the decisions is simply because we understand how humans think. Because, that's just, it's a weird form of speciesism even, perhaps, but that's always a very, what's the word? Something that leads to a lot of discussion kind of comment. So if we now think about specifically the question that you asked me, why are value-based principles hard to align and to operationalize and to standardize, to specify? I think there are a few reasons. So the first one is that simply the way in which they're expressed are often too abstract and contentless. So there was this famously, as we know from the literature, this overemphasis on the what of AI ethics. So all this whole, all these principles, and no trying to make any kind of conceptual sense of them. And then there was the techno-solutionism, the focus on the how. But I think the problem is that we still don't really understand how to concretize and how to how to really in practice engage with value-based principles in the context of AI, because we don't really stop to reflect on the why. There is the what, there is the how, but there is also the why. And for me, the why means that AI ethics is about ensuring that humans attain lives of well-being in some way while living with AI. So that's the role of AI ethics. And for me, it has to do with ensuring autonomy of humans in the fullest sense, which would entail that humans can act freely on the basis of reasons that they can understand and endorse without manipulation. So kind of, if you think back to Isaiah Berlin, like really realizing positive liberty, in a sense. And I see here some connection with Federica's talk, because we have to bridge the gap between concerns that intuitively belong to ethics and those that intuitively belong to epistemology, so that while we assess the entire life cycle of an AI system, we can build, through doing that, we can build fair and accountable and transparent systems. And I'll just give you, if you allow me one more minute, I just want to give you like an idea of how I think we could do this. And philosophically, I see some connection with the capabilities approach. Nussbaum specifically defines capabilities as political entitlements that impose duties on governments. And then what I think we should do to concretize AI ethics and value-based principles is to ask what kind of entitlements will allow humans the positive liberty to not just take meaningful control of their lives, but to actually fulfill their fundamental purposes to self-determine with authenticity. So I think we are here not considering political entitlements, but ethical ones. And we're not considering duties placed on governments per se, but also on researchers, designers, developers, deployers, and users of AI technology. So all AI actors throughout the life cycle. So the duties I see relating a bit to Federica's ethics and epistemology dimension when she talks about the XAI context. And the AI actors, I was thinking when I saw your graphs, Federica, is maybe, to ensure that we have expert and non-expert. We understand that experts and non-experts also have duties to ensure that AI is designed responsibly. So to give you one last concrete example, so AI ethics then should translate and actualize human entitlements, value-based principles such as the right to privacy, to realize positive liberty, so just to decide to give agents, the human agents, users of AI, the opportunity to decide whether or not to sign a consent letter. In terms of positive actions for all AI actors, so ensuring responsible third-party sharing, looking at access to own data, considering data ownership, and so on. So in this way, that's one way to, if we also look at the why question, we can get away from the abstractness of these kinds of principles. And then the last point that I just want to make in terms of also the alignment of policies, we have to understand that standardization, so there is an almost natural resistance. On the one hand, there's people that really, really want the international, that want interoperability of policies. And it's necessary in certain regions of the world specifically, because in many countries there is absolutely no protection for any users of AI, because there's no national strategy, there's no national policy. And yes, of course, there's international law, but that's very far removed sometimes from people's lived experiences. But then there's also, we have to realize that standardization benefits the big tech companies. So it's easier for them to predict what would be needed if everybody marches to the same tune. So, and then the other problem with this is also, at least in terms of the Western political landscape, forced policy alignment, benefit sharing, equal distribution of resources isn't something, those are not thoughts that come, that is inherent or are inherent to Western political landscape. So there's almost a kind of natural resistance because the way in which the political world is structured is around national sovereignty of states. So we have this tension between the international take and saying that what we do is, of course, grounded in international law. But then we also have to understand that there is the way in which politics works at the moment is around national sovereignty of states. So at all these different levels, at the values, at the principles, value principle based principles, and at the level of trying to align policies, we have different kinds of issues that come into play. And there are others also, but I hope that you will maybe ask me about them later. So, and I won't be this long-winded again, but I just wanted to make these points.
Yeah, thanks so much for this very comprehensive and detailed answer. That was truly captivating, and I guess there's a lot to pick up on for the further discussion with the audience once we close that session. So, but let me just move to the next question, because I think that part of your answer kind of nicely ties it to that one, and so that connects more, drawing on Federica's talk, where she proposed integrating ethical and epistemological consideration basically across the whole process of designing, implementing, using, and assessing an AI system. And that kind of intricate relationship between ethical and epistemological consideration is also at stake in the recent combination of what I call fundamental rights and risk-based approaches to AI governance and regulation. And I wanted to have your feeling on regarding that shift from the very kind of value and risk-based approaches that was typically exemplified by the OECD, G20 framework, UNESCO's recommendation, towards the increasing integration of this kind of more like risk management frameworks, and whether you see this kind of shift toward integrating this risk consideration as just a pragmatic move that enables basically kind of decision makers, policymakers, government to build on existing methodologies, tools, and practices in the safety, in the product safety domain, or just as a result of the sometimes a bit very powerful lobbying of some sort of ideologies, such as the X-risk communities or the AGI narrative, which also was at stake to some extent with the Future of Life Institute open letter last year in this kind of consideration. So what's your view on that shift and interaction?
Thanks, Manuel. I think there are some pros. Let's give the devil its due first. I think moving to the risk-based approach has some advantages. So especially if we think in terms of general purpose models, that are so powerful, and it's very difficult to oversee and to predict the capabilities of these kinds of models into the future. There is also what I've already spoken about. I think this is kind of an explosion of the overemphasis on the how. This is a fast way to concretize value-based principles, to just translate them. People say it's future-proof. Yeah, I'm not so sure. But it might protect at an immediate level the most vulnerable groups, maybe faster than a value-based approach, an ethics-based approach. But that's also up for discussion. Obvious cons are that it takes us away from speaking about fundamental freedoms, the rule of law, democracy, human rights. It not purposefully. I'm not saying, for instance, the AI Act, is not necessarily somehow nested in these principles. Of course it is, but the rhetoric changes. And if there is one thing that I think is very important that people must understand, also in the context of these talks in terms of conceptual engineering, is that we have to be very careful about the language that we use. So the fact that there is this move away leaves a particular kind of impression. And it is also a move away from value alignment because it moves away from human rights and ethics vocabulary. And it makes it easier for big tech. Okay, I know there's been a lot of clamoring from the tech community, but one has to also unpack that and reinterpret the clamoring from the context from where it comes. Now, yes, building on existing methodologies might be a reason for this move, because in terms of international approaches to AI governance, interoperability among regulations horizontally and harmonization of norms vertically really help. Okay, it makes sense. It helps to build a framework for international approaches. But if you want my honest opinion, I think it's simply because it's because of lobbying and because of the kind of environment within which these kinds of decisions are made. Ethics has a bad name in the AI context because it's soft law, because it's abstract, because, you know, for various reasons, all of them incorrect, because people don't really understand what AI ethics really is about, I think. But it's nested in human rights law. It's not in competition with human rights. And that's clearly set out in the UNESCO recommendation, what the relationship is between ethics and human rights. But yeah, I think on the whole, let me put it this way. We have to be very careful when we unpack risk-based vocabulary and language to see the hand of the tech community in some of that kind of language. So we have to be vigilant. We cannot, there is the danger that is that in the end it will benefit them in ways that we did not intend.
Thank you, Emma. Very insightful. Again, we'll go back to it during this discussion, I'm sure about that. So for the last one I have to address here is that it draws on both presentations today. So both these presentations have highlighted towards the conclusion of the talks, the critical need for a more like democratic, participatory, inclusive processes in the integration of normative considerations, both epistemic and ethical alike, across the AI value chain. And I think one kind of challenge is when you try to set up this democratic, participatory, inclusive basic platform is to ensure that to some extent people are conceptually aligned to kind of merge conceptual engineering with one of the topics of today's session, in the sense that they put the same meaning under the same label. And that's what you were alluding to with regard to the importance of the language we use in this kind of context. And I think it's critical to be very careful with regard to that kind of strategic conceptual alignment in order to avoid potential conceptual misunderstanding under apparent linguistic agreements. And so, in your experience, because you in this policy work that you do, you've engaged with various actors from the AI ecosystem, be they the tech expert, the civil society, the NGOs, and so on. How can we foster basically mutual understanding between diverse communities with diverse backgrounds, with diverse interests at stake, at the same time mitigating issues related to what Federica dubbed the asymmetric situations in terms of expertise, either technical or in terms of regulatory matters. So how do you, provide this kind of safe, trustworthy, and with mutual understanding platform or situations?
I think it's a really tough question because there are a lot of, unfortunately, political agendas that we have to take into consideration when we think about conceptual alignment and when we think about hearing each other. So I think what is really important, and I would add somehow as a third kind of axe when I think of Federica's graphs to ethics and epistemology, I would add politics, but I would specifically add epistemic justice. So I think it is really important that we work towards an epistemically just AI system, AI ecosystem, in a global AI ecosystem that is epistemically just, so that we take the time to respect different values and to unpack what people in fact mean when they say, people talk about differences, cultural differences in values and so on, because this conversation is a double-edged sword. It can go bad if it completely collapses in complete relativism. So, we can't have regulation because anything goes, because what's okay in my country is not okay in your country or in my culture. And so then, it is used as a means to obstruct regulation. And we have to identify it as such. And then also, when we are concerned about the unrepresented vulnerable groups in terms of like being actual data points and being excluded from benefits because they don't exist in the training model that the algorithm bases its allocations of, whatever, whether it's a loan, whether it's access to an institution, whether it's bail or whatever it might be, on, and we clamor for, groups not to be made invisible. It is also the case that the minute that we collect data on these invisible groups and we overemphasize the importance of having all cultures and all social groupings represented, that we increase their vulnerability, because it leads immediately, if you think of migrants, if you think in terms of different gendered groups, it leads immediately to surveillance, and it leads to targeting them in particular way, facial recognition apps in terms of migrants and so on. So we have to be very careful that we don't fall again for this, that we understand what we mean when we talk about conceptual alignment, and that we care enough to do it in a context of epistemic justice, where culture is then not the scissors, because if it plays this role, that one of these two negative roles, it cuts people, it ensures that people are divided. So it has to knit us together, because we have to stand united against the threat from AI to what it means to be human. But we want us not to be knitted together in an abstract way that doesn't at the same time recognize difference. And epistemic justice for me is the tool through which we can do that. So I really think the short answer is, it's a lot of work. It takes people that are dedicated, that really care, that will take time to understand. For instance, if you think of ethics on my continent, in Africa, we have more duty-based approaches. We have a collectivist ethics, where it is right-based individualist ethics that we think about when we think about the global north, but that's also a huge gross generalization. But we need time and people willing and having the necessary expertise to unpack these issues. And then we have to be careful of political speak. Is the only way to reach common goals a unified approach based on interoperability and harmonization? I don't know. If we look at UNESCO and we look at the whole idea about behind the readiness assessment methodology of meeting countries where they are with what they have, understanding what it is that they will need to be able to operationalize certain AI regulation, I think the answer is no. So I think we need an epistemic justice rhetoric instead of some kind of unified rhetoric, or some kind of overemphasis on cultural diversity, so that we can really take care that we actually don't throw out the baby with the bathwater in whichever way we want to go.
Thank you again for this truly insightful reply, Emma. So on that note, would you like to add anything to our discussion before we turn to the audience and open the floor to the discussion?
I think I've given really long-winded answers, but I just want to say one thing. I think that the work that Alex and Katia are doing is really important, because we have to also understand that the ethics of AI is also axiology of AI, but politics of AI. We have to understand, we have to wake up to this in all different ways in which we can. So I would really like to say a lot more about them, but I think this is such important work, and it also latches on obviously to what Federica is doing. So I cannot stress enough that AI ethics is not about window dressing. It's not easy. It's not skirting the responsibilities of upholding international law. On the contrary, it is trying to concretize, to have its ear to the ground, to try and flag, here is a disaster coming for this and this reason. So, and for that, we need this kind of sensitivity to the axiology of AI. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's truly inspirational. So on that note, I guess we can close this panel. Thanks to all.